Marcus Washington just fired an entire flight crew in 30 seconds for refusing to serve his 8-year-old triplets dinner. And the worst part isn't that. It's that the flight attendant called his children those people thinking he couldn't hear. The private jet hummed quietly at 35,000 feet, but the tension inside the luxury cabin was suffocating. Marcus Washington, CEO of Washington Global Industries, and one of the wealthiest black executives in America, sat watching his 3 children, 8-year-old triplets Marcus Jr., Maya and Michael, being systematically ignored by the flight crew. What started as a routine business flight from New York to Los Angeles had turned into something much uglier. The children had politely asked for their meal service an hour ago. They were hungry, well-behaved, and dressed in their Sunday best for their father's important board meeting. But head flight attendant Jennifer Walsh had other priorities. Marcus had built his $3.2 billion empire by reading people, situations, and power dynamics with surgical precision. 20 years ago, he'd been the poor kid from Detroit who earned a full scholarship to Harvard Business School. Now he owned the private jet, employed 50,000 people globally, and was about to close the largest acquisition in tech history. But none of that mattered to Jennifer Walsh, who saw 3 black children and assumed they didn't belong in first-class luxury, even though their father owned the entire aircraft. If you believe children should be treated with dignity, regardless of their skin color, you need to hear what Marcus Washington does next. Because this CEO is about to serve justice at 35. Marcus Washington had learned early in life that success didn't eliminate racism, it just changed the venue where you encountered it. At 42, he had spent 2 decades building Washington Global Industries, from a small Detroit software company into a multinational corporation that specialized in educational technology and digital infrastructure. The private jet was a Gulfstream G650, purchased not for luxury, but for efficiency. Marcus traveled constantly between offices in 12 countries, and commercial flights simply couldn't accommodate his schedule. More importantly, the jet allowed him to bring his children on business trips during school breaks, ensuring he didn't miss important moments in their lives. Marcus Jr., Maya and Michael were remarkable children. At 8 years old, they spoke 3 languages each, had been coding since age 5, and understood their father's business well enough to ask intelligent questions about quarterly reports. They were also impeccably behaved, having been raised with the understanding that they represented not just their family, but their entire community, wherever they went. Today's flight was special. Marcus was flying to Los Angeles to finalize the acquisition of Pacific Learning Systems, a deal that would make Washington Global the largest educational technology company in the world. The children had been excited about the trip. Their father had promised them a visit to the Griffith Observatory after his board meeting. Head flight attendant Jennifer Walsh had worked private aviation for 15 years, serving celebrities, politicians, and billionaires. She prided herself on providing impeccable service to the right kind of clientele. When she saw the manifest showing a Washington Global charter, she assumed she'd be serving another tech executive and his family. She hadn't expected them to be black. The flight had started normally. Marcus settled into his seat with financial reports, while the children buckled themselves in, chattering excitedly about their upcoming adventure. But as the plane reached cruising altitude, Marcus began noticing the subtle signs of service discrimination he'd encountered his entire life. Jennifer's smile was forced when she spoke to the children. Her voice carried an edge of impatience when Maya asked politely for a glass of water. When Michael dropped his coloring book, Jennifer stepped over it rather than helping him pick it up, something Marcus had never seen her do with adult passengers' belongings. At 2 p.m., the children asked about lunch service. "Excuse me, ma'am," Maya said in her carefully practiced polite voice. "When will lunch be served?" Jennifer glanced at them dismissively. "Lunch service is for first-class passengers only." Marcus looked up from his reports. His children were sitting in the first-class cabin of his own private jet. There was no economy section. "These are first-class seats," Marcus Jr. said politely, pointing to the leather recliners that cost more than most people's cars. Jennifer's expression hardened. "First-class service is reserved for paying customers." The comment hit Marcus like ice water. His children weren't paying customers, they were his children, flying on his jet to his business meeting. But Jennifer Walsh had looked at 3 well-dressed, polite black children, and assumed they didn't belong. Marcus set down his papers and approached the galley where Jennifer was preparing drinks. "Excuse me, is there a problem with meal service for my children?" Jennifer's demeanor changed completely when addressing Marcus directly. Her voice became professional, apologetic. "Oh, Mr. Washington, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize they were with you. I thought they were." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I thought they might be part of a group booking." Marcus's jaw tightened. "A group booking? Sometimes we get, charity cases. Kids who win contests or scholarships for flights. They don't usually expect full meal service." The explanation was worse than the original slight. Jennifer hadn't just discriminated against his children, she had created an entire narrative about why 3 black children didn't deserve the same treatment as other passengers. "These are my children," Marcus said, his voice deadly calm. "This is my aircraft. And they asked politely for lunch an hour ago." Jennifer's face flushed. "Of course, sir. I'll prepare their meals immediately." But as Marcus returned to his seat, he heard Jennifer mutter to the second flight attendant, loud enough for him to hear. "I should have known. These people always make everything about race." Marcus Washington stopped walking. His children looked up from their coloring books, sensing the change in atmosphere. Maya, the most sensitive of the triplets, reached for her father's hand. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" Marcus knelt beside his daughter's seat. "No, sweetheart. You're not in trouble. You did nothing wrong. But someone was about to be in very serious trouble indeed." Marcus returned to the galley, his business instincts taking over. 20 years of corporate negotiations had taught him that the most dangerous conversations happen when people think they're off the record. "Jennifer," he said quietly, "could I speak with you privately?" She followed him to the rear of the aircraft, away from the children. "Mr. Washington, I want to apologize for the confusion earlier. Sometimes with charter flights, the passenger manifests aren't clear about family relationships." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I understand mistakes happen, but I'm curious about something you said. About these people's making everything about race." Jennifer's face went pale. "I didn't mean anything by that, sir. It was just what?" Jennifer glanced toward the children, then back at Marcus. Something in her expression shifted, a calculated decision to double down rather than apologize. "Look, Mr. Washington, I'm sure you're a successful businessman, but let's be honest here. When I see 3 black children on a private jet, my first assumption isn't that they belong here. It's that they're charity cases or scholarship winners." Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but his voice remained controlled. "Why is that your first assumption?" "Because that's usually what it is," Jennifer said, her professional mask slipping completely. "I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know my clientele, and frankly your demographic doesn't typically charter private jets." The word demographic hung in the air like toxic smoke. "My demographic," Marcus repeated slowly. Jennifer seemed to realize she had crossed a line, but instead of backing down, she pressed forward. "I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm being realistic. The private aviation industry serves a specific type of client. When that changes, it affects service standards." Marcus pulled out his phone and began recording. "Could you elaborate on what you mean by service standards?" Jennifer, unaware she was being recorded, continued. "Look, I've served celebrities, politicians, Fortune 500 CEOs. There's a certain level of sophistication expected. When passengers don't understand proper etiquette, don't tip appropriately, or make unreasonable demands about discrimination, it creates problems for the crew." "Are you saying my children lack sophistication?" "I'm saying they're not our typical passengers. And when children aren't accustomed to this level of service, they can be demanding, especially when they've been taught that everything is about race." Marcus stopped recording. He had heard enough. "Jennifer, I want you to understand something very clearly. Those children you're referring to are Marcus Jr., Maya and Michael Washington. They speak Mandarin, Spanish and English fluently. They've been coding since age 5. They understand corporate finance well enough to read quarterly reports." Jennifer's expression began to change as the implications sank in. Marcus Jr. has already been accepted to MIT's summer program for gifted children. Maya volunteers at a literacy program, teaching other children to read. Michael has donated more money to charity this year than most adults earn. He stepped closer to Jennifer, his voice remaining calm but carrying unmistakable authority. and the demographic you think doesn't belong on private jets. I'm Marcus Washington, CEO of Washington Global Industries. This is my aircraft. Those are my children. And you just spent 20 minutes explaining why you think we don't deserve basic human decency. The blood drained from Jennifer's face. But here's what you really need to understand. Marcus continued. This conversation is being recorded. Your comments about these people and demographics and service standards are documented. And when we land in Los Angeles, you're going to learn exactly what happens when someone discriminates against my children. Jennifer tried to speak, but Marcus held up his hand. We still have 3 hours of flight time remaining. My children are still hungry. You're going to serve them the best meal this aircraft can provide. You're going to treat them with the respect they deserve. And you're going to do it with a smile. He turned to walk away, then paused. Because when we land, you're going to need those 3 hours to figure out how to explain to your next employer why you were terminated for racial discrimination on a private jet owned by one of the wealthiest black executives in America. As Marcus returned to his children, he heard Jennifer frantically whispering to the second flight attendant. The damage control had begun, but it was already too late. Drop dignity matters below if you believe children deserve respect regardless of their skin color. Because what Marcus Washington does next will show you exactly what happens when someone mistakes a father's patience for weakness. The meal service that followed was a masterclass in professional humiliation. Jennifer Walsh, now fully aware of the magnitude of her mistake, approached the children with exaggerated politeness that felt more insulting than her original dismissal. "Mr. Marcus Jr., what would you prefer for lunch today?" she asked. Her voice artificially sweet. Marcus Jr. looked at his father uncertainly. At 8 years old he could sense the adult tension but didn't understand its source. "Just the regular lunch, please," he said politely. Jennifer turned to Maya. "And Miss Maya, what can I prepare for you?" Maya, always the most perceptive of the triplets, studied Jennifer's face carefully. "Are you okay, ma'am? You seem upset." The question hit Jennifer like a physical blow. The child she had dismissed as a charity case was showing her more genuine concern than she had shown them. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Jennifer replied, her voice cracking slightly. As Jennifer retreated to the galley, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "LA Times wants to interview you about the Pacific Learning acquisition. Should I confirm?" Marcus stared at the message, then looked at his children. Maya was helping Michael with his coloring book while Marcus Jr. read a chapter book about coding. They were exactly what they had always been, brilliant, kind, well-behaved children, who deserved to move through the world without having to prove their worth to adults who judged them by their skin color. He typed back, "Confirm the interview." And add a second topic, corporate diversity in private aviation. An hour later, Jennifer approached Marcus with a proposal that revealed the true depth of her panic. "Mr. Washington," she said quietly, "I've been thinking about our conversation earlier. I may have misspoken about some things." Marcus looked up from his laptop. "Misspoken? I think there was a misunderstanding about my comments. I wasn't referring to race when I mentioned demographics. I was talking about age. Children in general require different service protocols than adult passengers." Marcus closed his laptop slowly. "Jennifer, are you asking me to pretend you didn't say what you said? I'm suggesting that maybe we both misunderstood each other. These kinds of miscommunications happen in high-stress situations." Marcus pulled out his phone and played back her recorded voice. "When I see 3 black children on a private jet, my first assumption isn't that they belong here." Jennifer's face went ashen. "That wasn't a miscommunication," Marcus said calmly. "That was a confession." Jennifer's desperation became palpable. "Mr. Washington, I have 3 children of my own. I need this job. If you report this incident, I'll be blacklisted from the entire industry." Marcus felt a moment of genuine sadness for her situation. But then he looked at his children, who were quietly eating their lunch, unaware that they had been judged and found wanting by an adult who didn't even know their names. "Jennifer, let me ask you something. If my children weren't here, if this was just a conversation between 2 adults, would you have said those things about black passengers?" Jennifer's silence was answer enough. "The problem isn't that you made a mistake," Marcus continued. "The problem is that you revealed how you really think about people who look like my family, and now you're asking me to protect you from the consequences of your own beliefs." Jennifer tried one final approach. What if I apologized to the children? What if I explained that I was having a bad day? Marcus shook his head. My children shouldn't have to forgive racism because an adult was having a bad day. They shouldn't have to educate you about their humanity. They should be able to exist as children without having to prove they deserve basic respect. He stood up and walked to the cockpit door. Captain Morrison, could I speak with you privately? When Captain Morrison emerged, Marcus handed him the recording device. I need you to listen to this conversation and tell me whether this crew meets the professional standards expected on Washington Global Aircraft. As Captain Morrison listened to the recording, his expression grew increasingly grave. When it finished, he looked at Jennifer with disappointment and something approaching disgust. Jennifer, in 30 years of aviation, I've never heard a crew member speak about passengers this way. This is grounds for immediate termination. Jennifer's final mask fell away completely. This is ridiculous. One comment about demographics, and suddenly I'm a racist. This is exactly what I was talking about. Everything becomes about race with these people. The phrase "these people" echoed through the cabin one more time. Marcus Jr. looked up from his book. Daddy, why does she keep saying "these people"? Aren't we all just people? Out of the mouths of babes came the question that adults spend lifetimes trying to answer. Marcus knelt beside his son's seat. Yes, buddy. We're all just people. Some adults forget that sometimes. As the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, Jennifer Walsh was about to learn that some lessons cost more than others. Comment below if you believe that children shouldn't have to prove their worth to adults. Because Marcus Washington is about to show exactly what happens when someone underestimates a father's love for his children. The Gulfstream touched down at Van Nuys Airport at 4:47 p.m. Pacific Time. As the aircraft taxied toward the private terminal, Marcus Washington was already making phone calls that would reshape Jennifer Walsh's understanding of consequences. His first call was to David Chen, senior partner at Chen & Associates, the most prestigious employment law firm in California. David, I need immediate legal representation for a discrimination case. Private aviation, recorded evidence, witnesses present. His second call was to Sarah Martinez, Director of Human Resources for Washington Global Industries. Sarah, I need you to contact Global Aviation Services immediately. Cancel our contract, effective today. His third call was to Robert Thompson, Editor-in-Chief of Aviation Week magazine. Robert, I have an exclusive story about discrimination in private aviation. Recorded evidence included. Jennifer Walsh, who had been listening to these calls with growing panic, finally understood the magnitude of her situation. Marcus Washington wasn't just wealthy, he was connected. The network of professionals, journalists and industry leaders he was mobilizing represented the kind of power that could end careers with a phone call. As passengers prepared to disembark, Jennifer made her final, desperate play. Mr. Washington, she said, approaching him with tears in her eyes, I have something to tell you, something that might change how you see this situation. Marcus looked up from his phone. I'm listening. My ex-husband is black. My daughter is mixed race. I know I said some terrible things today, but I'm not a racist. I was having personal problems, and I took them out on your family. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Jennifer, having a black ex-husband doesn't give you permission to discriminate against black children. If anything, it makes your behavior worse. But you have to understand. I understand perfectly, Marcus interrupted. You thought you could treat my children poorly because you assumed they had no power. You thought their father was either absent or powerless to protect them. You made the same assumptions that led to your divorce, and now you're making them about my family. Jennifer's face crumpled. Please, I'll do anything. I'll apologize publicly. I'll take sensitivity training. I'll work for free. Marcus's expression remained unmoved. You're asking me to forgive behavior that you would never accept if someone treated your daughter the way you treated my children. As the plane came to a complete stop, Marcus gathered his children's belongings. Maya, Marcus Jr., Michael, it's time to go. The children bounded toward the exit, excited about their Los Angeles adventure. They had no idea that their father was about to make national news for their sake. But Jennifer Walsh had one final card to play. The nuclear option that desperate people use when they have nothing left to lose. Mr. Washington, she called out as he reached the aircraft door. You should know that this entire incident was recorded by the aircraft's security system. Everything that happened today is on video. Marcus turned back slowly. Yes, I know, I authorized those recordings. But the recordings show more than just our conversation. Jennifer continued, her voice taking on a vindictive edge. They show you threatening a crew member. They show you intimidating an employee. They show you using your wealth and power to destroy someone's livelihood over a simple misunderstanding. The threat was clear: if Marcus pursued legal action, Jennifer would claim he had abused his position to bully a working-class employee. Marcus walked back toward Jennifer, his expression completely calm. Jennifer, let me make sure I understand your position. You're threatening to portray yourself as the victim of the discrimination you committed against my children. I'm pointing out that there are two sides to every story. And my side is that a billionaire used his power to destroy a single mother's career because she made one innocent comment. Marcus pulled out his phone one more time. Jennifer, I want you to meet someone. He dialed a number and put the call on speaker. Senator Williams, this is Marcus Washington. I'm here with someone who has something interesting to say about discrimination in the workplace. Senator Patricia Williams, chair of the Senate Committee on Labor and Human Resources, answered immediately. Marcus, good to hear from you. What's the situation? I have a flight attendant who just threatened to claim that reporting racial discrimination constitutes workplace bullying. She seems to think that having power means you can't use it to protect your children from racism. Senator Williams' voice carried the authority of 30 years in public service. Put her on the phone. Jennifer's face went white as Marcus handed her the device. Ma'am, Senator Williams said, this is Senator Patricia Williams. I want you to understand something very clearly. Using anti-discrimination laws to shield yourself from the consequences of discriminatory behavior is not just morally reprehensible, it's potentially criminal. False claims of reverse discrimination waste government resources and undermine legitimate civil rights protections. Jennifer tried to speak, but Senator Williams continued. Furthermore, I've known Marcus Washington for 15 years. He's testified before my Committee on Educational Equity. He's donated millions to civil rights organizations. The idea that he would abuse his power is laughable to anyone who knows his character. The phone call ended, and Jennifer Walsh realized she had just threatened one of the most respected businessmen in America, while a United States senator listened. Marcus took back his phone. Jennifer, you have two choices. Accept responsibility for your actions with dignity, or watch me prove that discrimination has consequences regardless of how much you try to spin the narrative. As Marcus Washington and his children walked off the aircraft, Jennifer Walsh sat alone in the cabin, finally understanding that some mistakes can't be undone with apologies, threats, or excuses. The most expensive 30 minutes of her life had just ended. But Marcus Washington was just getting started. The private terminal at Van Nuys Airport was buzzing with more activity than usual. Word had spread quickly through aviation circles that Marcus Washington was making calls, and in an industry where reputation was everything, that kind of attention meant careers were about to change. Marcus's children were oblivious to the storm brewing around them. They excitedly pressed their faces against the terminal windows, watching other private jets taxi past while their father concluded the final phase of their in-flight experience. Daddy, Maya asked, why was that lady so sad when we left the airplane? Marcus knelt down to his daughter's eye level. Sometimes adults make mistakes, sweetheart. When they do, they have to face the consequences. Did she hurt someone's feelings? She hurt more than feelings, Marcus replied gently. She treated you differently because of how you look. That's never okay. Marcus Jr., always the most analytical of the triplets, looked up from his tablet. Is that why you were making all those phone calls? Partly, Marcus said. But mostly I was making sure other children don't have to go through what you experienced today. What his children didn't know was that Marcus's calls had triggered a response far beyond anything Jennifer Walsh could have imagined. Within 2 hours of landing, the story had reached the highest levels of corporate America, federal government, and media. His phone rang with an incoming call from Elizabeth Morrison, CEO of Global Aviation Services, Jennifer's employer. Marcus, I just heard about the incident. I want you to know that Jennifer Walsh has been terminated effective immediately. We're also implementing mandatory sensitivity training for all crew members and revising our service protocols. I appreciate that, Elizabeth. But termination isn't enough. What else can we do? Marcus looked at his children, who were now playing a quiet game together while they waited. I want Global Aviation Services to create a scholarship fund for underrepresented children to experience private aviation. I want diversity training to become industry standard. And I want a formal apology, not to me, but to every family that's been discriminated against by your crews. Elizabeth's voice carried genuine remorse. Consider it done. Marcus, I'm personally ashamed that this happened on one of our aircraft. But the real surprise came in Marcus's next phone call from an unexpected source. Jennifer Walsh herself. Mr. Washington. Her voice was barely audible. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to call. Marcus stepped away from his children. I'm listening. I've been fired. My apartment lease requires employment verification, so I'll probably lose my housing. My daughter's private school tuition was tied to my aviation benefits, so she'll have to transfer to public school. Marcus waited for the point of the call. But I'm not calling to ask for help, Jennifer continued, surprising him. I'm calling to tell you that you were right. Everything you said about my assumptions, my prejudices, my treatment of your children, you were right. Her voice cracked with what sounded like genuine remorse. I spent 15 years in this industry serving wealthy families, and I convinced myself that I understood who belonged and who didn't. Today I realized that I was the one who didn't belong. Marcus felt an unexpected moment of empathy. Jennifer, what will you do now? I don't know, but I'm going to start by having a very difficult conversation with my daughter about why mommy lost her job. And then I'm going to figure out how to become the kind of person who sees children like yours as brilliant human beings instead of demographic problems. There was a long pause. Mr. Washington, could I ask you one question? Yes. How do you teach children to be proud of who they are in a world that constantly tells them they don't belong? Marcus looked at his triplets, who were now helping each other with a puzzle, sharing pieces and celebrating small victories together. You teach them that their worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. You show them examples of people who look like them succeeding at the highest levels. And you make sure they understand that when someone treats them poorly, it says nothing about them and everything about the person doing the treating. Thank you, Jennifer said quietly, for the lesson and for the consequences. I needed both. After the call ended, Marcus sat with his children as they waited for their car to the hotel. Daddy, Michael asked, are we going to see the observatory tomorrow? Absolutely, Marcus replied. We're going to see the stars. But the real stars were sitting right beside him. 3 brilliant children who would grow up knowing their worth, understanding their power, and never accepting discrimination as normal. Hit that like if you believe children deserve to move through the world with dignity intact. Share this if you know someone who needs to remember that protecting our children from discrimination isn't about being difficult, it's about being parents. 6 months later, Marcus Washington received an unexpected package. Inside was a handwritten letter from a young girl named Sophie Walsh, along with a drawing of an airplane. Dear Mr. Washington, my mom told me about the day she was mean to your kids on the airplane. She's been working at a community center now, helping families, and she's a lot happier. She said I should write to say sorry, but I also wanted to say thank you. Mom told me that sometimes when adults make mistakes, other adults help them learn to be better. Thank you for helping my mom learn. P.S. I hope your kids still like airplanes. Love, Sophie, age 9. The drawing showed 5 figures standing in front of an airplane, 3 children, 1 adult man and 1 adult woman, all holding hands under a rainbow. Marcus smiled and showed the letter to his children. They insisted on writing back immediately, inviting Sophie to visit them the next time she was in New York. Sometimes the most important lessons happen at 35,000 feet, and sometimes the people we hold accountable end up thanking us for it.